Dog waits outside school daily. When teachers find out why, they're moved to tears. What do you think the teachers found out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The bell rang, signaling the start of another school day at Lincoln Elementary. Students scurried through the gates, their backpacks bouncing as they hurried to beat the morning tardy bell. Teachers stood at their posts, greeting the children with warm smiles and gentle reminders to walk, not run. Amid the bustle of the morning routine, a few students paused by the school's main gate, their attention drawn to a peculiar sight. There, just outside the iron bars, sat a scruffy brown dog. Its fur was unkempt, and its eyes were an unusual mix of caution and longing. Clutched in its mouth was a worn, laminated card. "Look, it's here again," a boy exclaimed, tugging on his friend's sleeve. The dog had become a familiar figure in the past few weeks, always appearing just as the first students arrived. It never barked or caused any trouble. It simply sat by the gate, watching silently as the children passed by. Teachers had noticed it too, exchanging curious glances as they ushered the students inside. "That dog's been coming here every day," Mrs. Carter, a second-grade teacher, remarked to her colleague one morning. "It's strange, isn't it? It just sits there with that card in its mouth." "Maybe it's hungry," suggested Mr. Fields, the gym teacher. "I'll bring it some food tomorrow." True to his word, Mr. Fields set a small bowl of kibble near the gate the next morning. The dog eyed him warily but didn't approach until he stepped back. Once the coast was clear, it cautiously padded forward, dropped the card momentarily to eat, and then picked it up again as if it were something precious. "What do you think that card is?" a student asked as she watched from a distance. "Maybe it's a message," her friend whispered dramatically. "Like a treasure map or something?" The teachers chuckled at the children's wild theories, but deep down they were just as curious. The card was clearly important to the dog. It never let it out of its sight for long. One morning, Mrs. Carter decided to take a closer look. Armed with a gentle voice and a pocket full of treats, she approached the dog cautiously. "Hey there, sweetie," she said softly, kneeling a few feet away. "Can I see what you've got?" The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but it didn't move. Its grip on the card tightened as Mrs. Carter inched closer, holding out a treat. "It's okay," she cooed. "I won't hurt you." After several tense moments, the dog finally dropped the card to take the treat. Mrs. Carter seized the opportunity, quickly picking up the card before the dog could reclaim it. Her heart skipped a beat as she examined it. It was an old student ID, the edges frayed and the plastic peeling. The face on the card belonged to a boy. His smile was wide, and his name, faded but still legible, read Michael Reynolds. Below the name was a year, 2014. Mrs. Carter's mind raced. "Michael Reynolds?" she murmured. "I think he used to go here." The dog whined softly, nudging her hand with its nose as if asking for the card back. She hesitated before placing it gently on the ground. The dog immediately picked it up and retreated a few steps, its gaze fixed on her. "What's your story, little one?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. During lunch, Mrs. Carter brought the card to the teacher's lounge, eager to share her discovery. "You won't believe this," she said, holding it up for everyone to see. "The dog's carrying a student ID from 2014. Michael Reynolds, does anyone remember him?" Several teachers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and confusion. Finally, Mr. Fields spoke up. "I think I remember him," he said slowly. "Quiet kid, always sat in the back. He had this little dog he'd talk about all the time." Mrs. Carter's eyes widened. "This has to be the same dog. But why would it still be coming here after all these years?" "No idea," Mr. Fields admitted. "But it's loyal, I'll give it that." The room fell silent as the teachers pondered the mystery. The dog's daily visits took on a new significance, its loyalty to Michael tugging at their hearts. What could have happened to the boy? And why did the dog keep returning to the school? Determined to uncover the truth, Mrs. Carter began searching the school's records for information about Michael. She combed through old yearbooks, attendance logs, and even the local newspaper archives, but her efforts yielded little. Michael had been an ordinary student, quiet and unassuming. There were no records of any major achievements or incidents during his time at the school. Frustrated but undeterred, she decided to reach out to the community. With the principal's permission, she posted a message on the school's social media page. "Does anyone remember Michael Reynolds, a student at Lincoln Elementary in 2014? We've discovered a touching story involving his dog and would love to learn more. Please contact us if you have any information." The post quickly gained traction, shared by parents, alumni, and local residents. Comments flooded in, many of them sharing memories of Michael. "He was in my son's class," one parent wrote. "Such a sweet boy. He was always talking about his dog. I think they lived near the park," another commenter added. "I used to see him walking his dog there all the time." The clues were promising, but one comment stood out above the rest. "Michael was a wonderful kid. He passed away a few years ago. I'm his aunt. Please message me if you'd like to know more." Mrs. Carter's heart sank as she read the words. Michael had passed away? She reached out to the commenter hoping to learn more. The next day, Mrs. Carter sat in a small coffee shop, waiting to meet Michael's aunt, Diane. She arrived promptly, her eyes kind but tinged with sadness. "Thank you for reaching out," Diane said, taking a seat across from her. "It means a lot that people still remember Michael." "He must have been an incredible boy," Mrs. Carter said. "Can you tell me about him?" Diane smiled faintly. "He was," she said. "Michael was quiet but so full of love, especially for his dog, Max. They were inseparable. Max was more than just a pet to him. He was his best friend." Mrs. Carter nodded, her heart aching. "We've seen Max at the school every day," she said. "He's been carrying Michael's student ID. Do you know why he might be doing that?" Tears welled in Diane's eyes as she processed the question. "Michael loved school," she said. "It was his safe place. And Max was always waiting for him when he got home. When Michael passed, Max must have been confused, looking for him everywhere. I guess the school is the last place he remembers Michael being." Mrs. Carter felt a lump in her throat. The image of Max sitting by the gate, waiting patiently with Michael's ID, took on a heartbreaking clarity. "I think Max still believes he'll see Michael," she said softly. Diane nodded, her voice trembling. "He's waiting for his best friend to come back." After her meeting with Diane, Mrs. Carter couldn't stop thinking about Max. The dog's devotion was heartbreaking yet profoundly moving, a testament to the deep bond he had shared with Michael. She shared what she had learned with the other teachers, and they too were deeply affected. "It's incredible how animals can hold on to love like that," Mr. Field said, his usual boisterous tone softened. "That dog's been coming here every day holding on to hope. We have to do something." The teachers agreed. They decided to create a welcoming space for Max, somewhere he could rest comfortably during his daily visits. Mr. Fields took the lead, building a small shelter just outside the school gates. They lined it with soft blankets, set out bowls of food and water, and even added a sign that read "Max's Spot, a friend of Lincoln Elementary." When the students arrived the next morning, they were delighted to see the new addition. "Look, Max has his own house," a little girl exclaimed, pointing at the shelter. Max, as usual, was sitting by the gate with Michael's ID in his mouth. He watched the activity with his soulful eyes, cautiously approaching the shelter when the crowd had dispersed. The sight of him curling up on the blankets brought a wave of relief to Mrs. Carter. At least now, Max had a place of comfort. Over the next few weeks, Max became an unofficial mascot for the school. Students would stop by the gate to greet him, and some even brought their own treats to add to his food bowl. One of the older students, a budding artist named Lily, painted a small portrait of Max and hung it in the hallway with the caption, "Our loyal friend." The teachers also began incorporating Max's story into their lessons, using it as an example of loyalty, love, and the special bond between humans and animals. The students were captivated, and many of them wrote essays or drew pictures inspired by Max. One day, a second grader named Emily approached Mrs. Carter with a question that stopped her in her tracks. "Why doesn't Max just come inside?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed. "We could all take care of him." Mrs. Carter knelt down to Emily's level, choosing her words carefully. "Max is very brave, but I think he's also a little scared," she explained. "This was Michael's school, and Max is still waiting for him. But we can show Max that he's not alone anymore, even if Michael isn't here." Emily nodded solemnly, her young mind working to process the complex emotions behind Mrs. Carter's words. "I'll bring him my blanket tomorrow," she said, "in case he gets cold." As Max's story spread throughout the community, people began stopping by the school just to see him. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, Max's daily vigil became a symbol of love and loyalty that touched hearts far beyond Lincoln Elementary. One weekend, a journalist visited the school to write a feature on Max. Mrs. Carter and Diane were interviewed, sharing their insights into Michael's life and the bond he had shared with Max. "Michael had the kindest heart," Diane said during the interview, her voice trembling with emotion. "He saw Max as more than just a dog, he was family. I think that's why Max keeps coming back. He's holding on to that love." The article was published a few days later, accompanied by a photo of Max sitting by the school gate with Michael's ID in his mouth. The story went viral, sparking an outpouring of support from people around the world. Letters and gifts poured in, many of them addressed to Max. Some included treats and toys, while others shared personal stories of pets who had shown similar loyalty. One letter, written by a retired teacher from another state, stood out to Mrs. Carter. It read, "Max's story reminded me of a dog I had as a child. He waited by the bus stop for me every day, rain or shine. Animals like Max teach us what it means to love unconditionally. Thank you for sharing his story." Mrs. Carter read the letter aloud to the staff during a meeting, her voice filled with emotion. "Max has become more than just a dog waiting by the gate," she said. "He's a reminder of the power of love, the kind that doesn't fade even when the person you love is gone." One evening, as Mrs. Carter locked up her classroom, she noticed Diane standing by the gate watching Max. The dog was resting in his shelter, his head resting on his paws. Mrs. Carter walked over, sensing that Diane had something on her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about Max," Diane said, her voice heavy with emotion. "He's been carrying Michael's ID for so long, like it's his way of holding on to him. I wonder, does he understand that Michael isn't coming back?" Mrs. Carter sighed, her heart aching for both Diane and Max. "I think he knows deep down," she said. "But sometimes, love doesn't need logic. Max isn't waiting because he doesn't understand, he's waiting because that's what love does." Diane nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I just wish there was something more we could do for him." Mrs. Carter placed a reassuring hand on Diane's shoulder. "We've already done so much. Max may still be waiting, but he's not alone anymore. He has all of us." As winter approached, the school held a special ceremony to honor Max and Michael. The students and staff gathered by the gate, where a small plaque had been installed beside Max's shelter. The plaque read, "In loving memory of Michael Reynolds, a boy who loved deeply, and Max, his loyal friend." Diane spoke during the ceremony, sharing stories of Michael's kindness and the bond he had shared with Max. "Michael believed that love could change the world," she said, her voice trembling. "And through Max, that love has touched more lives than I ever could have imagined." When it was Mrs. Carter's turn to speak, she addressed the students directly. "Max has taught us all a valuable lesson," she said. "Love isn't about what you get in return, it's about what you give even when it's hard. Max reminds us to hold on to that love, no matter what." The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, the crowd standing together in quiet reflection. Max sat beside Diane, his head held high as if he understood the significance of the moment. As the ceremony ended, the community slowly dispersed, leaving Max sitting quietly beside the plaque. Diane stayed behind, gently stroking his fur as the evening breeze began to roll in. The dog seemed more at ease than ever before, his soulful eyes gazing up at Diane as if to say he understood the love surrounding him. Mrs. Carter stayed as well, watching from a distance. She had witnessed countless moments of kindness and compassion over her years as a teacher, but this one felt different, transformative. Max wasn't just a dog to the school anymore. He had become a symbol of love's unbreakable endurance. As the days turned into weeks, the plaque in Max's shelter became a gathering spot for the students. They would leave small gifts for Max, hand-drawn pictures, letters, and even little trinkets they thought he might like. Max accepted them all graciously, his gentle demeanor earning him even more admirers. One day, Emily, the second grader who had been especially touched by Max's story, approached Mrs. Carter with an idea. "What if we make a book about Max and Michael?" she suggested, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "We can put in all the pictures and stories everyone's been making." Mrs. Carter smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily. Let's make it a class project." The students eagerly embraced the idea, pouring their hearts into the project. They drew pictures of Max and Michael, wrote stories about their imagined adventures together, and even added photographs of Max at the school gate. The book, titled Max and Michael, A Story of Forever Love, quickly became a cherished keepsake for everyone involved. When the book was finished, the students presented it to Diane during a small gathering at the school. Tears filled her eyes as she flipped through the pages, each one a testament to the love her nephew and his dog had shared. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "Michael would have been so proud." Max, sitting by her side, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He rested his head on Diane's lap, his tail wagging softly. It was as if he, too, felt the love and appreciation radiating from the room. Meanwhile, the story of Max and Michael continued to spread far and wide. A local journalist wrote a follow-up article, highlighting the student's book and the impact Max had made on the community. The article caught the attention of a publisher, who reached out to the school with a proposal to turn the project into a published children's book. Mrs. Carter and the students were thrilled by the opportunity. They worked closely with the publisher, refining the book and adding a foreword that explained Max's story. When the book was finally published, it became an instant hit, touching the hearts of readers across the country. All proceeds from the book were donated to a local animal rescue organization, ensuring that other dogs like Max would have a chance to find love and companionship. The students felt a deep sense of pride, knowing they had helped make a difference. As winter deepened, the community's bond with Max only grew stronger. The school organized a special holiday event, inviting families to bring their pets for a celebration of love and loyalty. The event, aptly named Max's Miracle Night, featured activities like pet portraits, storytelling sessions, and a donation drive for the animal shelter. Max was the guest of honor, of course. He wore a festive red bandana around his neck and greeted each visitor with a wag of his tail. The students took turns reading aloud from Max and Michael, a story of forever love, their voices filled with pride as they shared their work. At the end of the evening, Diane stood up to speak, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and emotion. "Max has taught us all that love never truly fades," she said. "It lives on in the people and animals we touch." Michael's love for Max brought us all together, and for that I'll always be thankful. Her words were met with a round of applause, and as the evening came to a close, the community left feeling inspired by the bond between Max and Michael. As the years went by, Max's daily visits to the school continued, though his steps grew slower with age. The students who had first met him graduated and moved on, but they carried his story with them, passing it on to younger generations. Max's shelter remained a fixture at the school gate, lovingly maintained by the staff and students. One spring morning, Max didn't show up at the school gate. Mrs. Carter, now retired but still a frequent visitor to the school, felt a pang of worry. She reached out to Diane, who confirmed her fears. Max had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news spread quickly through the community, bringing a wave of sadness but also a sense of gratitude for the love Max had shared. The school decided to honor Max with a permanent memorial beside the plaque dedicated to Michael. The memorial featured a bronze statue of Max, sitting proudly with Michael's ID card in his mouth. The unveiling ceremony was a bittersweet occasion, attended by students, teachers, and families who had been touched by Max's story. Diane, holding a framed photo of Michael and Max, spoke once again about the bond they had shared. "Max taught us all that love doesn't end with loss," she said. "It carries on in the lives we touch, in the stories we share, and in the memories we hold close. Michael may be gone and now Max too, but their love will always be with us." As Diane placed the photo at the base of the statue, a hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, it was as if Max and Michael were there, watching over everyone with the same love and loyalty that had defined their lives. Even after Max's passing, his story continued to inspire. The book Max and Michael, A Story of Forever Love, was translated into multiple languages, reaching readers around the world. Schools and animal shelters used the story as a teaching tool, showing children the importance of compassion and loyalty. At Lincoln Elementary, the statue of Max became a symbol of the school's values: love, kindness, and resilience. New students learned about Max and Michael during their first week of school, ensuring that their legacy would never be forgotten. And for Mrs. Carter, who had witnessed it all from the beginning, Max's story remained a source of comfort and inspiration. On quiet afternoons, she would visit the memorial, sitting beside the statue and reflecting on the lessons Max had taught her. "Thank you, Max," she would whisper, her voice filled with gratitude, "for everything." The day after Max's memorial, the school was unusually quiet. The students, who had come to view Max as part of their daily lives, were subdued, their laughter softer and their footsteps slower. Even the teachers found it hard to focus, their thoughts often drifting to the loyal dog who had brought so much love and meaning to their community. Mrs. Carter, though retired, decided to spend the day at the school. She knew the children needed comfort, and so did she. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed something beautiful. Students were leaving little notes and flowers at the base of Max's statue. Some of the notes were simple, written in shaky handwriting. "We'll miss you, Max." Others told stories of how Max had inspired them to be kinder, to love their pets more, to never give up on someone they cared about. One note caught her eye in particular. It read, "Max, you taught me that love doesn't go away just because someone isn't here anymore. I promise to keep loving just like you did." Mrs. Carter wiped away a tear as she read the note. Max's legacy was alive, not just in the physical memorial but in the hearts of the students who had been touched by his unwavering devotion. She knelt by the statue, arranging the flowers and notes more neatly, ensuring each one was visible. Later that week, Diane visited the school to thank everyone for their support. She brought with her a special gift, a scrapbook filled with photographs and memories of Michael and Max. The pages were worn but lovingly arranged, each one telling a chapter of their story. There were photos of Michael and Max at the park playing fetch, and even one of them curled up together on the couch, fast asleep. Diane handed the scrapbook to Mrs. Carter with a trembling smile. "I thought the school should have this," she said. "Max and Michael's story belongs here, where it all began." Mrs. Carter accepted the scrapbook with gratitude, her hands lingering on its cover. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means so much." The scrapbook was placed in the school library, displayed beside the book the students had created. It became a cherished artifact, something future generations of students could look at and learn from. Teachers often used it during lessons about loyalty and love, sharing stories of Max and Michael to inspire their students. As time went on, the community continued to honor Max and Michael in various ways. One local artist painted a mural on the side of the school, depicting Max sitting proudly by the gate with Michael's ID card in his mouth. The mural was vibrant and full of life, a fitting tribute to the bond that had touched so many. The mural became a popular spot for photos, with families and visitors often stopping to admire it. Children would point excitedly, saying, "That's Max. He was the bravest dog ever." The mural not only kept Max's memory alive but also served as a reminder of the values he represented: kindness, loyalty, and the enduring power of love. Meanwhile, the book Max and Michael, A Story of Forever Love, continued to gain popularity. Teachers across the country began incorporating it into their curriculums, using it to teach empathy and compassion. Animal shelters reported an increase in adoptions, with families inspired by Max's story choosing to give homes to pets in need. One shelter director wrote to Mrs. Carter, saying, "We've had so many people come in and tell us they read about Max and wanted to find their own loyal companion. His story has truly made a difference." Mrs. Carter shared the letter with the students, who beamed with pride. They had never imagined that their project could have such a far-reaching impact. "Max would be so proud of all of you," Mrs. Carter said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've helped him change the world." One spring afternoon, a group of students approached Mrs. Carter with an idea. "We want to start a club," one of them explained, "to help animals like Max." The idea quickly gained traction, and within weeks, the Max and Michael Club was officially formed. The club's mission was simple: to spread kindness and help animals in need. They organized fundraisers for local shelters, volunteered at adoption events, and even held workshops to teach younger students about responsible pet care. The club's first major project was a donation drive for the shelter that had originally rescued Max. Students collected food, blankets, and toys, filling dozens of boxes with supplies. When they delivered the donations, the shelter staff were overwhelmed with gratitude. "This is incredible," the shelter director said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Max's story has inspired so much love. Thank you for carrying on his legacy." The students left the shelter that day with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew they were making a difference just as Max had. As the years went by, Max's story continued to grow. Alumni of Lincoln Elementary often returned to the school to visit the statue and share their memories. Some brought their own children, eager to pass on the story of Max and Michael to the next generation. One former student, now an author, wrote a memoir about how Max had inspired her during a difficult time in her childhood. The memoir, titled Waiting at the Gate, Lessons from Max, became a bestseller, further spreading the message of love and resilience. In the book's dedication, she wrote, "To Max, who taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world. And to Michael, who showed us all that it's never too late to make a difference." Even in her retirement, Mrs. Carter remained deeply involved in preserving Max's legacy. She often visited the school to help with the Max and Michael Club's projects, and she continued to receive letters and messages from people who had been touched by the story. One evening, as she sat by the statue, a young girl approached her. The girl was holding a small stuffed dog that looked remarkably like Max. "Are you Mrs. Carter?" she asked shyly. Mrs. Carter smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Lila," the girl replied. "My mom told me about Max. She said he was the bravest dog ever." "He was," Mrs. Carter said warmly. "And he loved Michael more than anything." Lila hugged her stuffed dog tightly. "I want to be like Max," she said. "I want to love people and help animals." Mrs. Carter felt a lump in her throat. "I think you already are," she said softly. Max would be so proud of you." As Lila walked away, Mrs. Carter gazed up at the statue, her heart full. Max and Michael's story had created a ripple effect, touching lives in ways she never could have imagined. Their love had transcended time and space, leaving a legacy that would endure for generations. And as the sun set behind the mural, casting a golden glow over Max's painted figure, Mrs. Carter knew that their story was far from over. It lived on in every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, and every bond formed between humans and animals. Max and Michael had shown the world that love, true and unyielding, could change everything. As the Max and Michael Club continued to grow, its impact spread far beyond the school. What had started as a small group of students inspired by Max's loyalty blossomed into a community-wide initiative. Parents began joining their children in volunteer efforts, and local businesses offered support in the form of donations and sponsorships. The club even caught the attention of a regional animal welfare organization, which invited the students to participate in a statewide conference about the importance of humane education. The students, excited but nervous, prepared diligently for the event. They created a presentation titled Max's Legacy: How One Dog Taught Us to Love and Give Back. The slideshow included photographs of Max, excerpts from the book the students had written, and details about their projects. Emily, now in 3rd grade and one of the club's most passionate members, practiced her part of the speech every day after school. "I just want to make Max proud," she told Mrs. Carter during one of their rehearsals. Mrs. Carter smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already have, Emily. Max would be so proud of everything you're doing." The day of the conference arrived, and the students stood nervously backstage waiting for their turn to present. They had watched other schools showcase impressive projects, from recycling programs to community gardens, and the pressure to represent Max's story weighed heavily on their young shoulders. When it was finally their turn, Emily led the group onto the stage. She stood at the podium, clutching her cue cards tightly, and took a deep breath. "Good morning," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We're the Max and Michael Club from Lincoln Elementary, and we're here to share a story about love, loyalty, and how one dog changed our lives." As Emily spoke, her confidence grew. She told the audience about Max's daily visits to the school, his bond with Michael, and the incredible lessons he had taught the community. The other students took turns describing their projects, from the donation drive to the book they had published. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and by the end of the presentation the audience was on their feet, applauding loudly. Afterward, many attendees approached the students to express their admiration. "Your story was so moving," one teacher said. "It's amazing how much you've accomplished because of Max." Another attendee, a representative from an animal shelter, invited the students to visit their facility and help with an upcoming adoption event. "We'd love to have young leaders like you inspire others," she said. The students left the conference feeling proud and motivated, their hearts full of gratitude for the opportunity to share Max's story with an even wider audience. Back at Lincoln Elementary, the momentum from the conference fueled even greater ambitions for the Max and Michael Club. The students brainstormed new ways to make a difference, including starting a pet food pantry for families in need and organizing regular visits to local shelters. The school administration fully supported their efforts, allocating a special space in the library for the club's meetings and projects. One of the club's most ambitious ideas was to create a documentary about Max and Michael. The students worked together to write a script, conduct interviews, and film reenactments of key moments in Max's story. With the help of a local filmmaker who volunteered his time, the documentary, titled Max: A Legacy of Love, came to life. The premiere was held in the school's auditorium, which was packed with students, parents, and community members. Diane was given a place of honor in the front row, and as the lights dimmed, she felt a surge of emotion. The documentary was a beautiful tribute, capturing not only Max's story but also the ripple effect of kindness and compassion he had inspired. When the lights came back on, the audience erupted into applause. Tears streamed down Diane's face as she hugged the students who had worked so hard to honor her nephew and his beloved dog. "You've kept their memory alive in the most beautiful way," she said. "Thank you." As the documentary gained traction online, Max's story reached an even larger audience. People from around the world shared the video, leaving heartfelt comments about how it had touched their lives. Some wrote about their own pets and the lessons they had learned from them, while others shared stories of overcoming loss and finding hope. One comment stood out to Mrs. Carter: "I watched this with my family and we all cried. Max and Michael's story reminded us to cherish the time we have with those we love. Thank you for sharing this incredible story." Mrs. Carter shared the comment with the students during their next meeting, and they beamed with pride. "Max and Michael would be so proud of you," she said. "You've shown the world what love can do." In the years that followed, the Max and Michael Club continued to thrive. Each new group of students brought fresh ideas and energy, ensuring that the club's mission remained strong. The school became known not just for its academic achievements but also for its commitment to kindness and community service. The mural of Max by the school gate remained a cherished landmark, lovingly maintained by the students. It was updated periodically to include new elements, such as images of the projects inspired by Max's story. The mural became a living testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. One particularly memorable moment came years later, when the school celebrated the 20th anniversary of Max's first visit. The event, titled 20 Years of Love, honoring Max and Michael's legacy, brought together alumni, former teachers, and community members who had been part of the journey. Mrs. Carter, now in her 70s but as vibrant as ever, was invited to speak at the event. Standing before the crowd, she felt a wave of nostalgia and gratitude. "When Max first appeared at our school gates, none of us could have imagined the impact he would have," she began. "He taught us lessons that go far beyond the classroom. Lessons about love, resilience, and the power of one small act of kindness to change the world." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "Max may be gone, but his spirit lives on in all of us. Every time we choose kindness, every time we stand by someone in need, we carry forward his legacy." The crowd erupted into applause, their faces filled with love and admiration. Diane, now much older but still deeply connected to Max and Michael's story, hugged Mrs. Carter after the speech. "You've kept their memory alive in a way I never could have imagined," she said. "Thank you." As the sun set on the anniversary celebration, the mural of Max seemed to glow in the golden light. Students, parents, and teachers gathered around it, sharing stories and memories of the dog who had brought them all together. Some placed flowers at the base of the mural, while others simply stood in quiet reflection. For Mrs. Carter, it was a moment of profound peace. Max and Michael's story had started with a simple act of loyalty, but it had grown into something extraordinary, a legacy of love that would continue to inspire for generations to come. As she stood there, watching the next generation of students carry on Max's mission, Mrs. Carter knew that his story would never truly end. It would live on in every act of kindness, every bond formed, and every heart touched by the power of love. Max had waited by the school gate not just for Michael but for all of them. And in doing so, he had shown the world what it meant to love without limits.